The Pyrenees Mountains rise like a natural fortress, protecting a mystery that has puzzled scientists for generations. Hidden beneath these peaks lives a group of people who shouldn't exist, at least not the way they do. The Basques carry DNA that looks completely out of place in modern Europe. While massive migrations swept across the continent during the Bronze Age, transforming populations from Britain to the Balkans, the Basques somehow avoided it all. Their genetic code shows almost no trace of these changes. When the Moors invaded Spain in 711 AD, leaving genetic markers across the peninsula, the Basques remained untouched. And their language, Euskara, isn't related to Spanish, French, or any other European tongue. It stands completely alone, the last surviving language from before the Indo-European expansion. So who are these people? Are they survivors from the Ice Age? Or do they represent something even older? You won't believe what the evidence reveals. To solve this puzzle, we need to go back tens of thousands of years to when Europe was barely habitable. Glaciers covered the landscape, temperatures dropped to deadly lows, and human populations almost disappeared. Only a few safe zones remained, and one of them was the Franco-Cantabrian region, exactly where Basque country sits today. Archaeological evidence proves that humans didn't just barely survive here, they actually thrived. In caves like Altamira and Lascaux, paintings of bison, horses, and deer date back over 30,000 years. Using uranium series dating methods, scientists confirmed many of these artworks were created between 36,000 and 15,000 years ago. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were proof of a vibrant culture surviving in a frozen wasteland where most other groups had vanished. Even Neanderthals lived here. At Lazetchiki Cave, archaeologists found Mousterian tools dating back over 150,000 years. When modern humans arrived around 41,000 BC, they overlapped with Neanderthals for thousands of years. Modern Europeans, including the Basques, still carry 2 to 3% Neanderthal DNA from those ancient encounters. But here's what makes this significant. This land served as a genetic reservoir while Ice Age populations elsewhere disappeared. The ancestors of the Basques endured, protected by the Pyrenees and the resource-rich valleys of northern Iberia. When the Ice Age ended, a revolution transformed Europe, farming. Around 6000 BC, Neolithic farmers from Anatolia and the Near East migrated westward, bringing wheat, barley, sheep, goats, and pottery. Across most of Europe, these farmers completely replaced the local hunter-gatherers. But the Basque homeland tells a different story. At El Portalón Cave, near Atapuerca, scientists recovered skeletons dating between 3,500 and 5,500 years ago. In 2015, a team led by Uppsala University analyzed their genomes and published their findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. What they discovered was shocking. These individuals carried DNA from both Neolithic farmers and Mesolithic hunter-gatherers of Iberia. Unlike Central and Northern Europe, where farmers almost entirely wiped out older populations, the Basques retained a much higher proportion of hunter-gatherer ancestry. This balance was extremely unusual, and it created a genetic profile that still distinguishes the Basques today. Then something even more remarkable happened. After that initial mixing, the Basques became isolated. The Pyrenees acted as a natural wall, limiting large-scale migrations, but culture played an equally important role. Basque communities developed incredibly strong local traditions and identities that resisted outside influence. This explains something extraordinary. When researchers compared the El Portalón genomes to modern Basques, they found an almost unbroken genetic line, stretching across 3,000 years. Almost no populations on Earth show that level of stability. The Bronze Age was Europe's great turning point. Around 2500 BC, pastoralist groups from the Pontic steppe near modern-day Ukraine and southern Russia swept across the continent. They brought horses, new weapons, and Indo-European languages. Their DNA completely reshaped populations from Britain to Iberia, except the Basques. When geneticists examined Basque genomes, they found almost no trace of steppe ancestry. It's as if the great Indo-European wave crashed across Europe only to break against the Pyrenees. One genetic marker proves just how unusual this is. Nearly 70 to 75% of Basque men today carry the Y chromosome haplogroup R1 BDF27. That's one of the highest concentrations of any lineage in Europe. But what's even more striking is what scientists discovered next. This lineage shows almost no diversity. Geneticists estimate it likely spread from a small founding group around 4,200 years ago and then froze in place. This is why scientists sometimes call the Basques a living genetic time capsule. Their DNA looks like it was locked down thousands of years ago, while the rest of Europe kept changing. Other lineages, like EV65 linked to North Africa, do appear in Basque populations, especially in Álava and Biscay. But these remain tiny threads in the tapestry, never disrupting the core pattern. What makes the Basques remarkable isn't complete isolation, it's selective insulation. They absorbed just enough to survive, but resisted the sweeping transformations that reshaped their neighbors. If DNA explains how the Basques remain distinct, their language explains why. Euskara, or Basque, is Europe's last surviving pre-Indo-European language. It stands utterly alone. Unlike Spanish, French, or German, which all belong to the massive Indo-European family, Euskara has no known relatives anywhere. Linguists have spent centuries trying to link it to something. Anything. Georgian in the Caucasus, Berber in North Africa, even Sumerian in Mesopotamia. Sometimes tenuous similarities appear, like its use of ergative grammar, a structure it shares with some Caucasian languages, but none of these theories have held up. What scientists found about this language will surprise you. Euskara remains a true orphan. A linguistic fossil that has somehow survived into the modern age, and it has survived against extraordinary odds. Today, around 750,000 people speak Euskara across northern Spain and southwestern France. But what's truly remarkable is that Euskara isn't just one language. It splinters into at least 5 major dialects, some so different they're almost mutually unintelligible. Despite this, the language as a whole has preserved its structure for millennia, resisting assimilation even as Latin, Arabic, and Romance languages swept across Iberia. A groundbreaking 2021 study in Current Biology discovered something incredible. The boundaries of Euskara dialects align almost perfectly with genetic clusters in Basque villages. The language wasn't just a cultural marker, it actively reinforced population structure. Villages speaking one dialect tended to intermarry among themselves, creating a feedback loop where language shaped genetics, and genetics shaped language. Few other populations in the world show such a powerful overlap between speech and DNA. Euskara's endurance also speaks to Basque resistance to empire. When the Romans conquered Iberia, Latin replaced native languages everywhere from Gaul to Portugal, but in Basque valleys, Euskara remained. During Moorish rule from the 8th century onward, Arabic reshaped much of Spain's culture and vocabulary. Yet Euskara absorbed almost nothing. But there's something beyond science that explains their survival. Even under pressure from the Spanish crown in later centuries, when the language was suppressed in schools, Euskara survived underground, passed from parents to children. It is more than communication. It is a cultural shield, a living firewall that has helped preserve Basque identity for thousands of years. Science explains survival, but myth reveals how the Basques understood their own endurance. High in the Pyrenees, caves were said to be the home of Mari, the mountain goddess. She was not some distant deity, but a tangible presence, appearing as a woman with long hair or as fire streaking across the sky. She controlled the weather, brought balance to the land, and punished those who lied or broke community trust. In a culture that prized resilience and honesty, Mari embodied both survival and morality. Beside her was Sugar, often imagined as a serpent or dragon, representing storms, lightning, and male energy. Where Mari brought permanence, Sugar brought change. Together, they symbolize the balance between stability and transformation. Themes that echo perfectly with what genetics tells us about Basque history. A people preserved in place, but also able to adapt just enough to endure. Then there were the Gentilak, giants said to have lived before Christianity. According to legend, they built the dolmens, the massive stone monuments that still dot Basque hillsides today. What archaeology revealed about these legends is astonishing. When the Christian cross appeared, the Gentilak hurled rocks across the mountains and retreated into caves, disappearing from human sight. Archaeology shows that these dolmens really do date back to the Neolithic and Bronze Ages, connecting myth with material history. Other beings filled the Basque imagination. Lamiak, river nymphs with bird-like feet who could bless or curse depending on how they were treated. Sorganak, witches who served Mari, holding night rituals in the mountains. Spirits who explained storms, fertility, and misfortune in ways science could not. These myths weren't just entertainment. They bound the Basques to their land, their caves, their rivers, and their mountains. Strikingly, archaeology and genetics align with these stories. Continuity, deep antiquity, and survival against overwhelming odds. Modern science shows that today's Basques resemble Iron Age populations almost exactly. Their genetic profile has remained stable for over 3,000 years. Around 70% of Basque men still carry R1BDF27, echoing that Bronze Age founder effect. They also share about 70% of their genome with neighboring Spanish and French populations. But what sets them apart is what's missing. No Indo-European steppe ancestry. No significant Moorish DNA. In genetics, absence can speak louder than presence. The Basque myths of timelessness and resilience weren't exaggerations. They were reflections of a reality that archaeology and genetics now confirm. But what does this mean for understanding Europe's past? Almost every European population carries the fingerprints of migration. The people of Britain bear steppe DNA from Bronze Age herders. Italians carry traces from Greeks, Romans, and North Africans. Spaniards show genetic input from centuries of Moorish rule. In nearly every corner of Europe, DNA reads like a palimpsest, layer upon layer of migrations and mixtures, but the Basques resisted. Their DNA offers something rare, a snapshot of Europe before the great reshaping migrations. Geneticists often describe the Basques as a control group, a baseline against which other European populations can be measured. By comparing Basques to their neighbors, scientists can see how much mixing and replacement occurred elsewhere, and just how unusual it is to find a people whose ancestry has remained so stable for millennia. The numbers are striking. Analyses show that modern Basques still resemble Iron Age Iberians more closely than they do many of their immediate Spanish or French neighbors. Roughly 70% of Basque men carry R1BDF27, the same lineage that took root more than 4,000 years ago. Genome-wide studies confirm that their overall genetic profile has barely shifted for at least 3,000 years. That level of continuity is almost unheard of in Europe, where populations have usually been reshaped several times over. Yet the Basques are not frozen relics. What they represent goes deeper than genetics alone. The Basques share about 70% of their genome with other Iberians. They are European, but distinctively so, set apart by the missing layers that their neighbors absorbed. No Bronze Age steppe ancestry, no significant North African admixture, and little evidence of Roman genetic influence. It's a reminder that identity isn't just about what's added, but also about what's preserved. For science, this makes the Basques invaluable. They help answer fundamental questions. How did early farming populations mix with hunters? What did Europe look like before Indo-European languages spread? How much of Europe's diversity was shaped by migration, and how much by isolation? For culture, the Basques carry a different lesson. They show that language, geography, and identity can act as forces as powerful as armies. The Pyrenees Mountains provided a natural shield. Euskara acted as a firewall, discouraging assimilation. Myth and tradition anchored them to their homeland. Together, these forces slowed down history itself. In a globalized world where languages vanish every month and cultures dissolve into one another, the Basques remind us that survival is possible, not just in genetics, but in spirit. They are proof that cultural resilience can preserve identity even when surrounded by empires, invasions, and centuries of pressure. The Basques are a bridge between Ice Age hunters, Neolithic farmers, and the modern world. They show us that Europe's story isn't just about change. It's also about endurance.